So what then is the difference between the European intellectual who came together to, as you say, lead the peasants to economic transformation, and the African intellectual who, again, we've seen our own examples. You mentioned rightly Nkrumah. Nkrumah was not the only intellectual at the time. There were the big six. We still have them on their currency, but here we are. So what's the difference?
I don't think there's a difference per se. The starting points were different. The starting points of when you talk about what you can today call modern European democracy was happening at the time the capital accumulation had already started. So you are talking about distribution of wealth that has been created. It's a very different conversation. How successful they have been, well, they were not necessarily in modern democracy. Yes, at a point in time they were there, but in their modern democracies, they were not starting from below GDPs of $3,000 per capita. So it's a different kind of conversation. You had long institutions and traditions. If you go back to when Cambridge University and so on and so forth started, the African has two challenges. They had the hangover of colonialism. That book by Claude Eke talks about it. So our democratic project, actually, if you want to go back to the period of independence, started when the post-colonial era was ushered in. And the post-colonial era, what we declared as independence, Amilcar Cabral said this and got into a lot of trouble. He said, what kind of independence are you talking about if you are not in control of your sovereign productive forces? If you read Amilcar Cabral's Return to the Source, he talks about this in there. He says, you have an anthem and a dark-skinned president, that doesn't make you independent. So you already had a significantly distorted reality as your starting point. And then you were navigating in an international sphere where we always have to remember, it is very, very, very present today, that there's an interstate power struggle for domination and hegemony. Very complex environment with people who had no predecessors. Take Kwame Nkrumah. Who was he looking to? Whose mistakes was he able to say, that this becomes my experience? They were pioneers, and they were navigating in parts. And then some of the deformities that happened, and Claude Eke does the analysis very well in that book, is that the new post-colonial elite essentially took over the facilities of the state and became the new colonialists. And they looked after themselves. Look at the space in which we are. Local government has essentially collapsed.
But the point you make is fascinating because the first part of your analysis seemed to me like the same experience that Singapore went through. They had the same colonial challenges, but they came out okay.
No, Singapore may have had the same colonial challenges, but the structures that they set up were very different.
But they made a deliberate, conscious decision to do that. We did the opposite.
No, that's what we're calling for. At some point, people make a decision. Singapore could also have made a different kind of decision.
What stopped us? They had the same challenges. In fact, they even had far more crippling challenges than we did.
I don't know whether they had far more crippling challenges.
In population terms, it was smaller. In land size, it was smaller. In terms of resources, they didn't have as much as we. It can go on and on and on.
No, I'm not totally sure that population by itself. You know, I'm a big admirer of Lee Kuan Yew and Singapore and all of that, but I also try not to sign up too much to exceptional circumstances being the explanation. They made the right choices of governance. Some countries make the right choices and they move ahead. Some countries have big populations and they're in misery. If the big population was going to be the criteria of development, then the Democratic Republic of Congo must be the most coherent and one of the most prosperous, but that is not the reality on the ground. So there are leadership errors that we made. In my view, we did not significantly pursue the task of decolonization, especially after the overthrow of Kwame Nkrumah. There was just so much that he could do, but even he, Nkrumah is dogmatic, Nkrumahs don't like to hear this. Even he, people say to me, well, he couldn't have done it in the space of time. But for example, the land situation, we hardly tackled it. The pioneer leaders of the revolution in China, for example, Mao, however he became discredited in later years, he created the foundation for what became the reforms because he sorted out the land issue. In Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew dealt with it. So these are different models. Yes, Lee Kuan Yew may have had his objectives and all of that. They are different models. In Vietnam, it was bloody, but they went after it. They did the land issue. They sorted the land issue out. You will not find countries that do not have the distinct benefit of colonialism or the transatlantic slave trade that have made it to significant prosperity who did not carry out major land reforms.